Hi everyone, I know it's been a while, and if you want to check out what's been going on, it's going to be posted in the details section below. Other than that, we're going to go ahead and get started on chapter 4 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Frank Turek and Norman Geisler. As usual, there's not really going to be much going on the screen other than maybe a reaction or some kind of images sometimes pop up, and for those of you that just like to have YouTube videos going on in the background without watching, I'll go ahead and describe that, but otherwise there's not really much to miss happening on screen. If there's any references that are from the previous chapters, that'll be explained, so you don't have to watch the other videos to know what's going on. We're going to start off with chapter 4, which is titled Divine Design, and we have a quote here from James Tour, nanoscientist. Only a rookie who knows nothing about science would say science takes away from faith. If you really study science, it will bring you closer to God. This is something I actually used to believe back when I was a Christian as well. This idea that God was maybe a grand designer or engineer, and that the more that we studied the universe around us, then the more that we would kind of understand some of his programming, for example. Now, there are people that say that this doesn't work, that science kind of is its own thing, and that faith is a separate thing. And I mean, you can have two ideas that coexist at the same time. You can follow something that is reliable and repeatable, and you can follow something that is not that. But I think the problem comes into play when you're like me and you were really interested in science and in being a good Christian. And as you read your Bible, there were things that started to kind of not make sense because of what we do know in science, such as bird blood doesn't cure leprosy, and the walls of your house cannot catch leprosy and need to be cleansed free of it. So this is some of those issues that kind of pop up when it comes to studying about science and also matters of faith. So let's go ahead and get into the actual chapter. The astronomical evidence for God must be strong when atheistic physicists admit that the universe exploded out of nothingness. Okay, so here we have Frank doing this again. Nobody is saying the universe exploded out of nothingness. And I like how he puts the quotes here. Who is he quoting? You know, when you put a quote, he's referring to himself in chapter 3, but he's just doing it again, and we're not even finished with the first sentence of the first part of this chapter, so that's already frustrating. Frank does know better. Norman knows better. They know nobody's actually making this claim, and this is what's so frustrating about it. In previous chapters, they've actually got it right. They actually characterized it correctly sometimes, and they'll have the correct atheist argument sometimes. And then they just totally ignore it and go back to these straw man nonsense kind of arguments. So atheistic physicists admit that the universe exploded out of nothingness, and agnostic astronomers claim that, quote, supernatural forces, end quote, were so at work in the beginning that scientists are led back to, quote, a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries, end quote. And so this is a reference back in chapter 3 that it's, you know, Frank and Norman, they're not very good when it comes to references, and they're not really good when it comes to addressing what's actually being claimed. So just because some people maybe have this idea that, you know, it's like one person that said, oh, well, now we're led back to a band of theologians who have been sitting here for centuries. Who is this person, and why should we take them seriously? Science is not this idea about authorities. There's not one grand scientist who, you know, controls all of the science, you know what I mean? But because that's how it is in religion, that's something that is sort of assumed about science when it comes to certain Christian beliefs. But the scientific evidence for God does not end with the cosmological argument. Well, it didn't begin there either. For many, the precision with which the universe exploded into being provides even more persuasive evidence for the existence of God. Now, why is that? I mean, when we have, I don't know, sodium and water react violently, it creates a compound, the end, you know, when we have different kinds of chemistry interacting violently, right? It creates sometimes pretty benign or safe or necessary molecules. So why is it this idea that, oh, precision and explosions and stuff, when we see these things interacting daily? You can go to any chemistry class and watch them do experiments like this. This evidence, technically known as the teleological argument, derives its name from the Greek word telos, which means design. The teleological argument goes like this. Every design has a designer. Number 2, the universe is a highly complex design. Number 3, therefore the universe had a designer. Now, of course, the idea here is, we're going to be probably contesting number 2, and hopefully the authors are going to get into that and demonstrate that the universe is designed and that it's highly complex. I will say, though, as someone who has studied engineering, I didn't enjoy it, so I didn't finish the degree, but I did get like 3 years into my civil engineering degree. Design, like good design, is simple, because the more points that you have in the design, the more complex it is, those are more points of failure or potential failure. So a god would definitely know that and would definitely understand that the more, genetics we have, the more they can screw up when we try to reproduce. So yeah, I would definitely say that simple design is good. Highly complex, closer to somebody who doesn't know how to design, or something in nature like evolution, which isn't trying to fix anything or take anything back, but it sort of just tries to make do with what it has. So that kind of complexity is not anything indicative of a really good, all-knowing, all-powerful designer, at least not in my opinion. Isaac Newton, 1642 to 1727, implicitly confirmed the validity of the teleological argument when he marveled at the design of our solar system. He wrote, "This most beautiful system of the sun, planets and comets, could only proceed from the counsel of dominion of an intelligent and powerful being." Well, how is he confirming the validity of the argument? He's musing about what he saw, and he's putting it into language that he's familiar with, religious language. So how is that confirming it? Wow, that's really, I'm going to say maybe the lowest piece of evidence they've brought thus far. Yet it was William Paley who made the argument famous in his common sense assertion that every watch requires a watchmaker. And I'm sure all of you are like screaming at the screen right now, just because some people believe it doesn't mean that it's true. Something that feels true doesn't have to be actually true. And you're right, I'm having that same that same argument or a scream going on in my head. Now I will say, let me adjust this real quick, because I think I'm scrolling by a little bit faster than you guys can see it. All right. So imagine you're walking along in the woods and you find a diamond-studded Rolex on the ground. What do you conclude is the cause of the watch? The wind and the rain? Erosion? Some combination of natural forces? Of course not. There's absolutely no question in your mind that some intelligent being made that watch, and that some unfortunate individual must have accidentally dropped it there. So of course, some of you are already thinking of the really common rebuttal to this, which is just because something looks designed doesn't mean it is designed, number 1. And number 2, we can only recognize that the watch is designed because we know that watches are designed and we have a natural world to contrast it with. And that's one thing that they actually mention, some combination of natural forces. They don't compare human design watch with God design Earth. They have this idea of natural forces. So are they saying that earthquakes are designed? I would say it's pretty bad design. Are they saying that erosion that can cause landslides and kill animals, people, and environments, that's good design? That was designed? That was intended? So it's a bit odd. There's absolutely no question in your mind that some intelligent being made that watch and that some unfortunate individual must have accidentally dropped it there. I don't know, maybe God put it there so I could find it. I'm sorry. I haven't been having the best week, okay? So I might be a little bit snarky here, all right? Scientists are now finding that the universe in which we live is like that diamond-studded Rolex, citation needed, except the universe is even more precisely designed than the watch, again, citation needed. In fact, the universe is specifically tweaked, citation needed, to enable life on Earth. So, wow, really? The universe is specifically tweaked to enable life on a single planet, and that's it. Okay. A planet with scores of improbable and interdependent life-supporting conditions that make it a tiny oasis in a vast and hostile universe. Wait, you just said what I just said. The universe is specifically tweaked to allow life on a tiny oasis in a vast and hostile universe. So the universe is specifically tweaked to make life in only a fraction of a percent of the universe, and all the rest of it is finely tuned to not allow for life. That didn't you aren't you just disproving your own claim here, authors? Like within the same if a student wrote this, okay, if a student wrote something like this that said A is something that we witness because we witness not A, I would say, hey, I would give them a 0 for that argument and just say, hey, you need to come back and revisit it. And if they had any questions why, I would just say, well, you contradicted yourself right here. You said the universe is specifically designed for life. And then in the same sentence, you said it's specifically designed to be hostile. So can't do that. These highly precise and interdependent environmental conditions, which are called anthropic constants, make up what is known as the anthropic principle. Anthropic comes from the Greek word that just means human or man. The anthropic principle is just a fancy title for the mounting evidence that has many scientists believing that the universe is extremely fine-tuned or designed to support human life here on Earth. Again, citation needed. I don't know where they're just throwing all this stuff out. So again, if this is something that one of my students had turned in, they can, if it was well written and the stuff in there I just happen to know is actually true because I'm the one that assigned the assignment and I know where all the information is and I know that the stuff they're writing is factually the case, because they're missing all in-text citations, they could only get a maximum of 60%. And the reason is because scientific arguments, scientific writing requires that you can't just randomly make claims or, spout off something that you think you heard or you think you learned, that kind of thing. Because sometimes we do learn things and it's actually wrong. For some reason in Korea, there's a lot of students that in elementary school, they read this book that said perfume, high heels, and umbrellas were invented in the Middle Ages in Europe because the streets were so poopy and people were throwing poo-poo out of the windows. So what, nobody before then wanted to smell nice? The perfumes that we found in ancient Egypt, those are somehow old or younger than the Middle Ages. Nobody else made an umbrella. And high heels, that was something designed for the Turkish cavalry. This was a military shoe. And how are high heels supposed to get your feet out of the poopy road? You might get your heel out of the poo-poo road, but what about your toes? That's still smashing in there. So it doesn't make any sense, but this is something students learned. They learned it as if it was true. And I actually did have a student write it down on the exam as some examples of inventions from the Middle Ages. And I had to go back and remind them, no, this is something that you heard and you didn't correct it after I updated your information. So this is why we have to demonstrate that we're not just making it up. They're not the ones that discovered this stuff. They're not the ones that came up with the term anthropic principle. They're not the ones who came up with the meaning of the term anthropic principle as this idea that the universe is extremely fine-tuned, right? Whose argument is this? Where does this come from? This is something that needs to be cited. And it's the same when they go back up here and argue stuff like, what is the teleological argument? They didn't invent the teleological argument. They should be citing this. And the really big one is stuff like this, where they claim that atheists are saying the universe exploded out of nothingness. That definitely needs an in-text citation. So if you haven't watched the rest of these, that's something I will periodically bring up, is that if a student turned in something similar to this, they would get a very poor grade. In this vast and hostile universe, we Earthlings are much like astronauts who can survive only in the small confines of their spaceship. Like a spaceship, our Earth supports life as it hurls through lifeless space. Well, at least we're not flat earthers, right? But also like a spaceship, a slight change or malfunction in any one of a number of factors, in either the universe or the Earth itself, could fatally alter the narrowly defined environmental conditions that we need to survive. Apollo 13, one of the most challenging and famed missions in the history of NASA, will help drive this point home. We're going to spend the next few pages aboard Apollo 13. No, 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 why are we doing this? And as we do, we'll point out some anthropic constants that make our life possible. I can't stand when they do this. We want them to explain how is the universe totally designed, and therefore it points to specifically Yahweh. That's all I care about. But instead we have this, they're going off on this tangent again that nobody's asking them to go off on. So originally, back in chapter 3, they were trying to argue that God is the creator of all these different things, like the second law of thermodynamics, for example. So they went in and just talked about the second law of thermodynamics. Nobody's going to two theologians or two apologists and trying to ask them to teach them about physics. Nobody asked for that. We're going here to these books for their argument, not for, hey, let me rehash what I think I remember when I learned this, because I'm not providing any sources. So nobody here is arguing that the Earth has narrowly defined environmental conditions we need to survive. You don't need to spend the next few pages doing this. You guys, I'm only doing this for you, okay? That's it. We're just going through this for you and to give this book a fair read. So we're not going to be able to say, oh, you know what, maybe we missed something really important in these pages. Otherwise, I would just skip this. Otherwise, I would have stopped reading a long time ago, girl. Houston, we have a problem. It's April 13th, 1970. More than 2 days since Mission Commander Jim Lovell and 2 other astronauts blasted out of the Earth's atmosphere on Apollo 13. They're now flying through space at more than 2,000 miles an hour, eagerly anticipating a walk that only a few men had taken, a walk on the surface of the moon. Everything is going as planned on their magnificently designed spacecraft. In Lovell's own words, he and his crew are fat, dumb, and happy. But all of that is about to change. We kind of say the same thing in the Marines. We're fat and happy. At 55 hours and 54 minutes into the mission, shortly after completing a TV broadcast back to Earth, Lovell is putting wires away when he hears a loud bang. He initially thinks it's just pilot Jack Swigert playing a joke by secretly actuating a noisy valve. But when he sees the concerned expression on Swigert's face, an expression that reveals, "It's not my fault," Lovell quickly realizes this is no joke. The dialogue between astronauts Lovell, Swigert, Fred Hayes, and Charlie Duke, Duke being on the ground in Houston, goes like this. Why do I gotta come up with voices on the fly? Alright, Swigert, Houston, we have a problem here. Duke, this is Houston. Say again, please. Lovell, yeah, Houston, we've got a problem. We've had a main B bus undervolts. Roger, main B undervolt. Okay, guys, so right now, Houston, the voltage is looking good. We had pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning there, and as I recall, main B was the one that had an amp spike on it before. Roger, Fred. That Joel must have rocked the sensor on the oxygen quantity too. It was oscillating down around 20 to 60%. Now it's full scale high. I don't know, sorry. At this point, the astronauts are not entirely sure what's happening. Oxygen tank sensors appear to be erratic. Why don't we just get to the anthropic principle? Why don't we just get to how we go to therefore Yahweh? They're showing the tanks have as little as 20% to the impossible quantity of over 100%. Meanwhile, despite Hayes' initial observation that the voltage is looking good, multiple master caution warnings on the ship's electrical systems are telling the opposite story. Within a few minutes, the dire nature of the problem becomes apparent. Apollo 13 doesn't just have a sensor problem, it has an actual problem. Their spacecraft, now nearly 200,000 nautical miles from the Earth and heading away from home, is quickly losing oxygen and power. 2 of the 3 fuel cells are dead, and the third one is depleting rapidly. Hayes notifies Houston about the power situation. Hayes, AC2 is showing zip. we got a main bus, say, under volt now. It's reading about 25.5. Mean B is now reading zip right now. I just got like a flashback to sitting in the pew and listening to the pastor go on a tangent like this. And then at the end, they just always tag on, like staple on, okay, blah, 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 staple, therefore God is great. And then we all sing praises and we feel good about it. Because we feel like we're learning something. And since we're attaching it to God, we feel like we're learning something about God. We're not learning anything about God here. We're learning about NASA. We're learning about spaceships. But we're not learning about God. So let's hurry up. Lovell then reports the oxygen problem. And our O2 quantity number 2 tank is reading 0. Did you get that? And then Houston says, O2 quantity number 2 is 0. Then as Lovell looks out the hatch, he sees what appears to be a gas venting into space from the side of their spacecraft, sorry. And it looks to me, looking out the hatch, that we're venting something. Roger, we are. We're venting something out into space. And Houston says, Roger, we copy, you're venting. It's a gas of some sort. That gas is later confirmed to be oxygen. Although the crew doesn't know this yet, Oxygen Tank 2 has just exploded and damaged Oxygen Tank 1 in the process. Lovell can't see the damage, just the venting gas. Alright, hopefully with this last part that's going to relate to something, some kind of analogy, that Lovell can't see the damage, just the venting gas. Alright, anthropic constant 1, oxygen level. On Earth, oxygen comprises 21% of the atmosphere. That precise figure is an anthropic constant that makes life on Earth possible. What are you talking about? Life on Earth began before oxygen. In fact, life on Earth existed, and then oxygen was being produced as a byproduct by some of that life, which killed other life. And then new life happened that could be relying on oxygen. What are they talking about? In the history of the are they young Earth creationists? Maybe that's why. If they're young Earth creationists, then they're going to say that all of that history of the billions of years didn't happen. But otherwise, yeah, we know that this 21% is not, that ain't it. If oxygen were 25%, fires would erupt spontaneously. If it were 15%, human beings would suffocate. Okay, what if it's like 21.001%? What if it's 20? Then it's not a precise figure, right? I mean, if it's 15% humans would suffocate, then surely I wouldn't suffocate at 20%. Maybe not even 19. If you got to drop it down 6 percentage points, then doesn't that mean that's enough wiggle room that humans would totally live? And if we're jumping it up 4%, so that way we can talk about fires erupting spontaneously, then doesn't that mean within that 4%, the fires aren't erupting and we're all totally fine and not dying? I mean, even just in their examples, they're disproving their own claims. Lovell and his crew must now find a way to maintain the right level of oxygen on their ship. But oxygen's not their only problem. Like the atmosphere on Earth, a change in one constant on the spacecraft can affect several others that are also necessary for life. The explosion creates a shortage not only of oxygen, but also of electricity and water. On Apollo 13, water and electricity are produced by combining oxygen with hydrogen in fuel cells. Without oxygen, there's no way to manufacture air, water, or power. And since they are in the vacuum of space, there's no source of oxygen from the outside. The situation is so unimaginable that Jack Swigert would later say, if somebody had thrown that at us in the simulator, meaning a quadruple failure of fuel cells 1, 3, and oxygen tanks 1 and 2, we'd have said, oh, come on, you're not being realistic. Unfortunately, this is not in the simulator, but a real emergency in a spacecraft 2/3 of the way to the moon. What can they do? Fortunately, there's a lifeboat. The lunar module, LM, known as the LEM, has provisions that can be used in an emergency. So what's the equivalent for Earth? Because that's what we're doing, right? We're talking about this for the equivalent for Earth. What's this, Jesus? Is Jesus the LEM? The LEM is a craft attached to the top of the command module, CM, that the 2 astronauts are scheduled to ride down to the moon while the 3rd astronaut orbits above. Of course, the moon landing is about to be called off. Saving the lives of the astronauts is now the new mission of Apollo 13. In an effort to save power for re-entry, The astronauts quickly power down the command module and climb into the LEM. But even with the LEM, the astronauts are by no means out of the woods. They still have to sling around the moon in order to get back to Earth. Also, Earth should be capitalized, just so they, again, it's these little details that kind of make me think, how educated are you on these topics? Just these little things, because they keep not capitalizing Earth. Anyway, this will take time they don't have. The LEM has provisions designed to sustain 2 men for about 40 hours, but they need to sustain 3 men for 4 days. Is this a Hanukkah reference that we're going to get too? As a result, every effort is made to conserve water, oxygen, electricity. All non-essential systems are shut down, including heat, and the astronauts decrease their water consumption to 1 small cup per day. Hayes, feeling ill, soon begins to run a fever, and all 3 of the astronauts slowly begin dehydrating. This makes concentration more difficult. Unfortunately, again, where's God here? Unfortunately, with most of the automated systems shut down, concentration becomes more and more critical. Besides slinging around the moon, the crew needs to make several manual course corrections to ensure they hit the proper re-entry angle to speed up their trip home. To do so, they'll have to manually navigate by the stars. But since debris from the explosion continues to envelop the ship in the vacuum of space, the astronauts can't distinguish the stars from sunlight reflecting off the debris. Consequently, they are reduced to using the Earth and the Sun as navigational reference points by lining them up in the spacecraft window. Great. Using this rather crude method, they check their calculations again and again to ensure they're correct. They have little room for error. In fact, they must aim the ship for re-entry point no less than 5.5 degrees and no more than 7.3 degrees below the Earth's horizon from the spacecraft's point of view. Any deviation from that range and their ship will either skip off the Earth's atmosphere or burn in a too steep a descent. Well, great. So we can see the power of math and science, human thinking. So where's God in this? Anthropic constant 2, atmospheric transparency. The small window, why are we still talking about the astronauts? Oh my God. Reflects the exacting standards by which the universe has designed, but you just said they had 5.5 and 7.3 degrees of play. I mean, it's not a lot of play, right? But it's not an exact 5.5, not 5.6, not 5.4, right? While the atmosphere presents a re-entry problem for the astronauts, its present qualities are absolutely essential for life here on Earth. The degree of transparency of the atmosphere is an anthropic constant. If the atmosphere were less transparent, not enough solar radiation would reach Earth's surface. And if it were more transparent, we would be bombarded with far too much solar radiation down here. In addition to atmospheric transparency, the atmospheric composition of the precise levels of nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and ozone are in themselves anthropic constants. Okay, so what about when we had that problem with the ozone layer in the 90s? What about the Earth's magnetic field? How come that's not mentioned? That has to do with solar winds and radiation. Anthropic constant 3, Moon-Earth gravitational interaction. As the astronauts begin to sling around the moon, they encounter another anthropic constant. This one regards the gravitational interaction that the Earth has with the moon. If the interaction were greater than it currently is, tidal effects on oceans, atmosphere, and rotational period would be too severe. But what do you mean by too severe? We would just be living in different spots. So let's say that there were tidal effects on the oceans, that the tide comes in into the shore even further. So we just wouldn't live in that area. We would just live further back. What do you mean? It's not like the oceans are going to submerge all of the continents just because if the interaction was greater. It just means we're not going to put houses that close to the beach. That's it. If it were less, the orbital changes would cause climactic instabilities. Is that really the case? Because I can't be taking them seriously because there's no citations. In either event, life on Earth would be impossible. Not impossible, just not what it is right now. That's it. It's not impossible. Following their close encounter with the moon, do they really think that there's been no change to the atmospheric conditions in the entire history of the planet? Do they really think that the moon, which is moving away from the Earth over time, that the moon never had different gravitational interaction with the Earth? They're really saying that. But we know this stuff is the case. This is basic stuff you teach in the first chapter of a geography book in high school geography. My goodness. Following their close encounter with the moon, the astronauts are finally heading toward home. However, still another problem arises. The delicate living conditions inside the spacecraft are becoming contaminated. As oxygen is being consumed, the astronauts are producing a new problem simply by exhaling. That is, carbon dioxide is beginning to reach dangerous levels in the ship. If they can't find a way the carbon dioxide filters in the LM, or to change the carbon dioxide filters in the LM, the 3 astronauts will be poisoned by their own breaths. Okay, great. So that's intelligent design? Mission Control tells the astronauts to unpack extra filters designed for the command module, the part of the ship that's been evacuated and powered down, to see if they can be used in the LM. But instead of getting the much-needed good news, the astronauts soon realized the CM filters are the wrong size and shape for the LEM. Contractor A apparently had not coordinated with Contractor B. Frustrated Flight Director Gene Kranz, who famously inspired Mission Control with "failure is not an option," barks, "Tell me this isn't a government project." Scrambling for a solution, NASA engineers on the ground begin what is known as a workaround as they brainstorm a way to rig the square CM filters to fit the round hole of the LEM with materials that can be scrounged up on the aircraft. They design a fix that they think will work and then talk the crew through the rigging process. Their workaround includes an ingenious use of cardboard, spacesuit hoses, stowage bags, and duct tape. Yes, it also fixes anything in space too. Don't leave home without it. Haha. Okay, where's God? Go get to God. Anthropic constant 4, carbon dioxide level. Of course, such a rig is not necessary here on Earth because we have just the right level of carbon dioxide and it's maintained naturally in the Earth's atmosphere. Again, it was at different levels in the past and we had life on this planet. This is another anthropic constant. If the CO2 level were higher than it is now, how much higher? A runaway greenhouse effect would develop, we'd all burn up. And if the level were lower than it is now, plants would not be able to maintain efficient photosynthesis. We'd all suffocate, the same fate that the astronauts are trying to avoid. Again, how much lower? Thankfully, the rigged filters work and buy the crew valuable time and breathable air. No. We're going back. So how much higher and how much lower? Because they were really specific about these other numbers. They wanted to say, gosh, it's got to be 21. Well, actually between 15 and 25, but it's 21. It's really precise, precision, intelligent design, precision. But here they're just saying higher and lower. We don't even have a percentage. We don't have a number. We have nothing. This, the fact that they were trying to be specific in previous examples and now they're not at all specific, this gives me the impression that there's actually a lot of wiggle room. And that really goes against their argument of intelligent, super precise design, this fine-tuning concept, and that's why they don't leave it in there. Since we are already this much invested in reading it, and I guess there's the assumption that most of us already believe what their end result or their end goal argument is, that we already believe it, they're just like, yeah, we don't have to explain it beyond this. But I think that's pretty sneaky. They pulled a sneaky on us. Soon the time arrives to jettison the crippled service module. As the service module falls away, the crew sees for the first time the extent of the damage. The oxygen tank explosion blew a 12 by 6 foot panel off the side of the service module, tilted the fuel cells, and damaged an antenna. Had an explosion less than half of the magnitude occurred near the heat shield of the command module, it would have resulted in a catastrophic failure of the spacecraft and the loss of the crew. Yeah, and if my aunt had wheels, she'd be a bicycle. So what? So are you saying that this explosion was fine-tuned because it exploded not near the heat shield? That's what we're saying? I mean, what's the point? Oh my gosh, guys, if that explosion was closer to this thing that's super critical, they would have died. Okay? But it wasn't, and they didn't. What's the point? Again, is this the fine tuning? Is this the finger of God intervening? And also, this whole time that we're talking about fine tuning stuff, these are 3 guys in a vehicle made for 2 guys, and they are going against their natural desire for water, and they are breathing out and existing in different concentrations of CO2, aren't they? If the CO2 levels get higher, they'll suffocate, but they're currently, as of where we are right now in the story, they're currently quite high, much higher than they normally are, and nobody's died and nobody's passed out. I mean, even the story is like the fact that these guys are surviving with these totally different levels of chemistry. This really disproves their argument, doesn't it? They're not happy about it, but they're not dead. If it continues, they're going to die, but they're not dead. And if it stays the same, they won't die. So I don't understand how this is helping their argument. But it sounds sciencey, right? It sounds historical, and therefore, when we throw it in here, we can kind of cloud what's going on with this sciencey sounding talk, and then we're going to just staple Jesus to the end and call it a day. As they approach re-entry, the crew climbs back in the command module in an attempt to power it up. This is their only hope of getting home. The LEM doesn't have a heat shield. But with all 3 fuel cells dead and only 1 battery power available, normal CM power-up procedure will not work. Not every system can be brought online because there simply isn't enough juice in the batteries. As a result, they have to rely on a new power-up procedure other than NASA engineers and astronauts have just finished developing on the ground. To complicate matters, condensed water is now dripping from the CM's control panels where the temperature is a frigid 38 degrees. I'm assuming Fahrenheit, and shame on you for not including your units. Will the panels short? Will the necessary systems come online? This is a dangerous environment in which to apply power, but they have no choice. Yeah, and then they didn't die. So again, the authors are explaining that this is a not ideal situation, and it still could successfully sustain life. Despite the danger, the new power-up sequence succeeds, and the astronauts strap themselves in for re-entry. Back on Earth, the world fixates on the fate of the 3 men. News bulletins and press conferences give timely updates. Congress passes a resolution for the American people to pray, and the Pope, notice it's not capitalized, interesting. The Pope urges the world to pray as the 3 brave Americans in a damaged space capsule accelerate toward the Earth's atmosphere at tremendous speed. In a short time, they will be pulled by the Earth's gravity to a maximum velocity of nearly 25,000 miles per hour. That's almost 7 miles per second. Again, they like to kind of wow us with big words and stuff that sounds like super sciencey. How are we getting closer to Yahweh? Anthropic constant 5, gravity. The gravity that is pulling the astronauts back home is still another anthropic constant. Its strength may be terrifying, but it couldn't be any different for life to exist here on Earth. No, different life would exist. If the gravitational force were altered by a fraction of a percent, notice they could have just used like 10 to the minus whatever power, but they want to make us really impressed with these big numbers and these many zeros. Our sun would not exist, and therefore neither would we. Talk about precision. Again, here's a number, here's numbers, here's all those numbers, but then if the CO2 level were higher or lower. As the astronauts plummet to Earth in their crippled spacecraft, no one is certain if they'll survive the violent and intensely hot re-entry. Too many questions remain unanswered. Is the heat shield fully intact? Is the ship really on the right entry angle? Will the entry batteries on the CM work? Will the parachutes deploy properly? And to make matters worse, there's a typhoon warning in the recovery area. In light of all the uncertainty, the astronauts pay their respects to the ground crew just prior to the 3-minute radio blackout that accompanies re-entry. Swigert says, "Hey, I just want to say you guys are doing real good work." Houston says, "So are you guys, Jack." "Well, I know all of us here want to thank you for the job that you did. Down here for a very fine job you did." Lovell says, "That's an affirm, Joe." Houston says, "I tell you, we all had a good time doing it." Lovell, "You have a good bedside manner." Houston, "That's the nicest thing anybody's ever said." "All right, loss of signal in a minute. Welcome home." Swigert says, "Thank you." During re-entry, the C-135 aircraft is circling the recovery area to provide the necessary communication link back to mission control. But after 3 minutes, there's no contact with the astronauts. Tension rises. Houston, "Apollo 13 should be out of blackout at this time. We are standing by for any reports of ARIA acquisition, which is Apollo Range Instrument aircraft." Which is not, No, network, no ARIA contact yet. Network says, "Not this time, flight." Long pause. 4 minutes since re-entry, still no contact. No re-entry has ever taken this long. So if they died, this might be a good argument, like as an analogy for fine-tuning or something, but we know they're not going to die. Houston, "We got a report that ARIA-4 aircraft has acquisition of signal, but there's no confirmation yet that anyone is alive." Houston, Odyssey, Houston, standing by, over. To the relief of everyone, Swigert finally speaks up. Okay, Joe. Houston says, okay, we read you, Jack. The astronauts are alive, but one last hurdle remains. 2 stages of parachutes. First the drogue, and then the main must work, or all will be lost. Without this, I'm still just like, where's the point? Where's God? But that's, I mean, I didn't buy, you don't buy these books because you want to learn about Apollo 13. If I wanted to learn about Apollo 13, I'd buy a book that's written about Apollo 13. I'd watch a documentary about Apollo 13. I would try to contact the astronauts or any of these surviving people that worked in the ground crew in Houston. I would do that. I wouldn't go to 2 theologian apologists and check out a book that talks about, hey, we're going to prove God is more likely than not God, and then have them go off on a tangent about Apollo freaking 13. This is I'm just very all right. So without successful parachute deployment, the astronauts will be obliterated as their capsule impacts the ocean at 300 miles per hour. Houston says less than 2 minutes now until the time of drogue deployment. Waiting. Report of 2 good drogues coming on main chutes. Pause. Standing by for confirmation of main chutes deploy. The main parachutes deploy as designed, and Houston gains visual with contact. Houston, Odyssey. Houston, we show you on the mains. It looks really great. Finally, after 4 days of nail-biting suspense, the astronauts, mission control, and the rest of the world breathe a sigh of relief. And Houston says, extremely loud applause here in mission control. Extremely loud applause as Apollo 13 on main chutes comes through loud and clear on the television display here. Splashdown occurs at 1:07 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on April 17, 1970. Okay, great. So we've just wasted... Wow. That's what? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's pieces, so I would say 6.5 pages. 6.5 pages. No. Here's 7, 8. So 8.5. 8.5 pages. Okay. So we had better really connect this as a very firm analogy so we can somehow get back to design is God and mission control is what? The angels? I don't know. But we'll figure it out, and it better make sense because we just sat through 8.5 pages of not theology. So let's go ahead and just see. What do we got? The anthropic principle, the design is in the details. While some in mission control began to express doubts that the astronauts will return alive, Flight Director Gene Kranz countered their pessimism with, "Gentlemen, I think this is going to be our finest hour." Indeed it was. Apollo 13 became known as a successful failure. The astronauts failed to walk on the moon, but they successfully returned to the Earth despite nearly lethal conditions. Thank you guys. I didn't know what successful failure meant. Thanks for explaining it. Just as the crew survived against all odds through those lethal conditions, we too survive against all odds on this tiny planet called Earth. Yeah, but are we having our oxygen blow out? How is this the same? It would be better to compare it to the ISS. You know what I mean? It's not like we're flying around and having to make new contact with a bigger planet and go through their atmosphere and stuff. This is not a good analogy. The Apollo spacecrafts, like our Earth, were designed to maintain human life in a very hostile environment of space. But the Apollo spacecraft, but some of them failed. Does that mean Earth is going to fail? Since human beings can only survive in a very, very narrow envelope of environmental conditions, these ships must be designed with incredible precision and thousands of components. If one thing goes wrong, human life is in jeopardy. On Apollo 13, the one small thing that put the crew in jeopardy seems too minor to matter. Oxygen tank number 2 had been accidentally dropped 2 inches at some point prior to its installation. That mere 2-inch drop damaged the tank's thin wall and began a cascade of events that ultimately led to its explosion. Due to the interdependent nature of the other components, the failure of the oxygen system led to a failure of the other systems to almost the loss of the spacecraft and crew. Yeah, almost. Almost, right? Think of it, that one little 2-inch drop led to all the problems the astronauts had to overcome in order to survive. It resulted in too little oxygen, water, and power, and too much carbon dioxide and navigation error. See, I figured they would do something like this, and I would be able to say, we didn't need 8.5 pages. We don't have to go into the entire story of what happened. We could just explain that this very famous thing that they could briefly say was a nail-biting event wherein astronauts battled against all odds to make it back to Earth in a craft that wasn't, that was failing rapidly or something, and then explain how it failed, and then we could just relate it back. That would take less than a page. Are they just trying to fill up pages? Because that's what it looks like. If this was something a student turned in, I would just say, why did you waste all this time writing and making me read it? Don't you think I have other stuff to do? So why am I having to read all of this stuff? You could have just condensed it if this was the only point you were trying to make, right? I'm not going to say it, that angrily, but this is really all you're trying to do. So why would you do this? There's no page requirement. That's why I don't put page requirements on my essays, because I don't want them to turn this stuff in. They're just filling up pages. They're not adding anything. They're just filling up pages. Like a small change in the spaceship, a small change in the universe will result in big wait. We're talking about the Earth. How do we know a small change in the universe is going to result in big problems for us as well? That's a jump. I don't know the universe, right? Are they going to tell us this? As we've seen, scientists have discovered the universe, like the spacecraft, is precisely designed. No, it exists. Look at this, is precisely designed to create the very narrow envelope of life-supporting conditions here on Earth. Again, Earth is not capitalized. I don't know why, but how are you going to sit here and say the entire gigantic universe, this huge area that we haven't even fully explored, that all of this is just so that one tiny planet that's orbiting a very minor star. That's what the universe was designed for? That's pretty bad design. Because that's a lot of wasted space, isn't it? That's a bad, bad, bad design. If the entire universe is fine-tuned just so a teeny little planet can have some life on it some of the time, then why do we need an entire universe for that? Why does the universe have to be this big? What about everything else in the universe? It's such a bad, oh my gosh, this is their best argument? This is their best argument. And not only is it their best argument, they're making a positive claim of it is precisely designed for this reason, but there's no evidence for that. Where is the evidence? Where is this evidence? Because if you look at the rest of the empty planets, it looks like this is a hiccup. That we got lucky on Earth, because it seems that if the universe is designed, it wasn't designed for life. And definitely not life as we know it. Right? This looks like a fluke, like a genetic mutation. You know what I mean? This is not the norm. So how can we sit here and claim that that's the universe's whole goal, is that this tiny planet has life that we recognize? That's such a bizarre claim. And then on top of it to say it is precisely designed for that reason. Any slight deviation in any number of environmental and physical factors that we've been calling constants would preclude us from even existing. And like the components on Apollo 13, these constants are interdependent. A small change in one might affect the others, and could prevent or destroy the conditions necessary for life. Well, look at this. A small change in one might, and it could prevent or destroy maybe. So we just went from precisely designed and any change will result in our death to, I don't know, maybe. Again, they're going against their own firm arguments. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate that they're actually using better language here because they don't know. So I appreciate that they're using this vague language because we don't know. But to sit here and first claim, yes, 100%, and now to say, well, I don't know, maybe. This isn't good argument. Or this is not good logic. These are not, ugh. You guys know what I'm trying to say. I'm very frustrated. The extent of the universe's fine-tuning makes the anthropic principle perhaps the most powerful argument for the existence of God. This is the best argument that you guys have, why is it in chapter 4? But this is the best argument you have? It's super bad. It's so bad. For all the reasons that I mentioned already. It's not that there's just a few broadly defined constants that may have resulted by chance. No, there's more than 100 very narrowly defined constants that strongly point to an intelligent designer, and designer is now capitalized. Not Earth, but designer, because we capitalize God, right? We've already identified 5 of them. Here are 10 more. Oh, why do I have to read this? If the centrifugal, I'm just going to blast her. If the centrifugal force of planetary movements did not precisely balance the gravitational forces, nothing could be held in the orbit around the sun. Who cares? Our sun is not the most important. If the universe had expanded at a rate of 1/1,000,000th more slowly than it did, expansion would have stopped and the universe would have collapsed in on itself before any stars had formed. If it expanded faster, well, how much faster? See, again, a rate of 1/1,000,000th more slowly, but then if it expanded faster, I don't know, then no galaxies would have formed. Okay, so citation needed again. Any of the laws of physics can be described as a function of the velocity of light, now defined to be 299,792,458 meters per second. Well, at least we get metric. Even a slight variation in the speed of light would alter other constants and preclude the possibility of life on Earth. Will it? Or would it just be different? And who cares about Earth? Again, Earth. This is the thing I really, really, really don't like about this type of Christian. They believe that everything happens for their benefit. This is the problem when you have this idea of a personal God. And it's really disgusting because you think like you're the main character and all these people enter and leave your life for your edification. That they're not other people. They're just actors that affect you and get you closer to God. Because I mean, I've heard people say, oh, that so-and-so had to die. Like, I'm sorry your child died, but you know, it's all part of God's plan so you can get closer to them. Okay, so then what about the child that died? But they just make it seem like it's just an event, you know, just to get us closer to God, and it's all for you and your benefit and you. I mean, talk about survivor bias, my goodness. If water vapor levels in the atmosphere were greater than they are now, again, no number, a runaway greenhouse effect would cause temperatures to rise too high for human life, and if they were less, an insufficient greenhouse effect would make the Earth too cold to support human life. If water vapor levels in the atmosphere were greater than they are now, a runaway greenhouse effect would cause temperatures to rise too high for human life, except that a lot of Christians believe that in the beginning, blah, 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 waters from the waters, that there was an ice dome originally. And I'm not talking like the people that have more fringe kind of beliefs, because like flat earth, it is actually, I would say the Bible does support a flat earth. I would say that, but for some reason, most Christians don't believe that, and so flat earth is kind of a fringe belief within Christianity. But this idea of like an earth that had because it said God separated the waters from the waters to create the firmament. So they believe, and this was like the type of Christian I was. I remember driving, listening to Hank Hanegraaff on his radio show, and he was talking about how there was some, I don't remember what the argument was specifically, but there was some relevance to the earth being surrounded by a really cold or frozen shield of water ice. And then this later comes up from the pulpit. So this is something that like our sect believed. And this sect is, I don't know if Turek and Geisler fall into that sect, but we're a subsect of at least, you know, evangelicals, which is where they would at least be for Turek and Geisler. So don't they believe this biblically? That the earth had a lot more water in the atmosphere? So that one's really interesting because this argument here, this quote unquote proof or evidence, it's actually against their theology. Unless they happen not to believe it. Maybe we just had different theology. You know, because God's very precise in his language. And that's how we all have just a single denomination of Christianity, right? If Jupiter were not in its current orbit, the Earth would be bombarded with space material. Jupiter's gravitational field acts as a cosmic vacuum cleaner. See, again, Jupiter only exists because of Earth. And Earth only exists because of us, right? That's it. If the thickness of the Earth's crust were greater, again, how much? Too much oxygen would be transferred to the crust to support life. And if it were thinner, volcanic and tectonic activity would make life impossible. Okay. If the rotation of the Earth took longer than 24 hours, temperature differences would be too great between night and day. What? That's an argument I have never heard. If the rotation period were shorter, atmospheric wind velocities would be too great. Again, I've never heard this. And too great. Too great for what? For your comfort? Like if it takes longer than 24 hours, so 24 hours and 1 minute, the temperature is going to be too great? Are we talking 75 hours? If the rotation period was shorter, so what, 23 hours and 59 minutes, or are we talking like 12 hours? See, they're not being precise, and there's a reason for that, because if it was a couple minutes more, there's wiggle room. That's the problem. There is wiggle room, and they're pretending there isn't. The 23-degree axial tilt of the Earth is just right. Wow. If the tilt were altered slightly, surface temperatures would be too extreme on Earth. All surface temperatures? So if it's 23.0001, 22.99999, that's going to be too extreme? I doubt it. If the atmospheric discharge, aka lightning rate, were greater, there would be too much fire destruction. Well, wait, greater again what? Do they really, like where are they thinking about? Because there were some places on Earth where they get hit by lightning nearly daily. I mean, too much fire destruction. So what, if it hits the water, it's going to have too much fire destruction? You know, most of our planet is watery, right? So, but they're just, again, they're just really thinking of like where they live. They're not considering any other place. They didn't even look up to find out, yeah, there are places that do get hit by lightning almost daily, like throughout the year. That's really, wow. If it were less, there would be too little nitrogen fixing in the soil. So again, you know, actually in these places where they do get a lot of lightning, it's because they have a lot of rain, and something like a rainforest actually has really, really, really poor soil health. So, you know, a lot of the nutrition for these trees, it actually comes from all the dead stuff on top of the soil. So it's this kind of an interesting thing they're trying to say, that they need the lightning to create this, but if we have more lightning, it doesn't mean that it's better, because if we're relating lightning to water, water will strip out these nutrients. So again, I don't come to them for geography. I don't come to them for atmospheric science. You know what I mean? If there were more seismic activity, much more life would be lost. What? Okay. What a weird phrase. What do you mean more seismic activity? What's much more? If there was so much more, I mean, are they saying if there were like more plate boundaries? Or if the plates move faster? If there were less nutrients on the ocean floors and in the river runoff would not be cycled back into the continents through the tectonic uplift. Yes, even earthquakes are necessary to sustain life as we know it. Well, I mean, a better designer, knowing that, because they're saying life is lost. Because if there's more seismic activity, much more life would be lost, right? So they're saying life is lost. Wouldn't an all-knowing designer who can design anything any way create a system where tectonic uplift could happen without earthquakes that kill people? Right? Bizarre. So if it is designed, it's very poorly designed. Astrophysicist Hugh Ross has calculated the probability that these and other constants, 122 in all, would exist today for any planet in the universe by chance, i.e. without divine design. Assuming that there were 10 to the 22 planets in the universe, which is a very large number, guys, one with 22 zeros following it. You guys, didn't I just say that? They're trying to wow us with large numbers. And I asked, how come they're not just using that exponential stuff, 10 to the whatever power? And now here they do, 10 to the 22, and then they put in parentheses a very large number, one with 22 zeros following it. Why are they trying? I'm not impressed by zeros. His answer is shocking. One chance in 10 to the 138. That's one chance in one with 138 zeros after it. How are they going to calculate probability without another universe to compare it to? It's like if I If I don't know how many sides a dice has, like a die has, and I roll it and I get a 3, how can I calculate the probability of it landing on 3 if I have no idea how many sides the die has? That's the problem. We don't know how many times a universe, I don't know, tried to start, could fail. Are there universes with other rules that somehow work, but we didn't think of it, etc.? We don't know. And we can't calculate this probability just by looking around and saying, okay, so from my limited position here on Earth, here's some numbers. And again, so what? That doesn't mean it's designed. It means it's unlikely. It doesn't mean it's designed. There are only 10 to the 70 atoms in the entire universe, so in effect there's a 0 chance. No, you just said there's a chance that any planet in the universe would have life-supporting conditions we have unless there's an intelligent designer behind it all. So again, very Earth-centric. No wonder it's the anthropic principle, right? Because it's so focused on humans. But what a waste of an entire universe and a bunch of stars, a bunch of planets. What a waste. It's such a bizarre, like such a selfish, a self-centered, egocentric argument to say everything in the universe was designed so I could be alive and write this book. That's really what they're saying. They're saying everything in the universe was fine-tuned so that they could write the book and we could read it. That's it. That's the whole universe, guys. That's it. That's the whole reason that it was created 14 billion years ago. And that's the reason that it's empty, except for this one planet, as far as we know. It's for this. It's for you and me and for God to communicate with us, Jesus, and save us. It's such a bizarre argument. And this is like, oh yeah, this is the best we got. They said this is their best argument. Nobel laureate Arno Penzias, co-discoverer of the radiation afterglow, put it this way: astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing and delicately balanced to provide exactly the conditions required to support life. In the absence of an absurdly improbable accident, the observations of modern science seem to suggest an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. Okay, again, Arno Penzias, he is discovering the radiation afterglow. Cool. Is he the god of astronomy? Is he like the mouthpiece of astronomy? Was he voted in as the representative of all like cosmology and astronomy? No. And for him to talk about astronomy and then to jump into how the universe began, which we don't know, and then to speculate it must be a god or supernatural, which I don't even know if that's what they're saying, because in previous chapters they have distorted quotes from scientists, from Carl Sagan. They've distorted quotes to make it seem like Carl Sagan supported intelligent design or that Albert Einstein said God exists. And these are none of the things they said. Some of you guys that are more familiar with their work than I am, you guys wrote it down in the comment section that in the context of what was written by, for example, Sagan, he was not saying at all what they were trying to make him say. So they're quote mining to make it sound a certain way. So I can't even assume that. They're telling us exactly what Penzias wanted to say. But even within this concept that they're having his words lead us to believe that he believes in the supernatural, so what? I don't care that Arno believes in the supernatural. Can he demonstrate the supernatural? Then I don't care. Cool, you were the co-discoverer of the radiation afterglow. That's awesome. And I totally will go with you on that. But that doesn't mean that because you understand one thing about the universe, therefore you're going to understand everything else about the universe. That's bizarre. But that's what they're trying to say. Again, they're stapling intelligent design onto like established science. That's the part that just doesn't work. You can't just staple it on there and say it's the same thing. Cosmologist Ed Harrison used the word proof when he considered the implications of the anthropic principle on the question of God. He writes, "Here is the cosmological proof of the existence of God. The design argument of Paley, updated and refurbished. The fine-tuning of the universe provides prima facie evidence of deistic design." Okay, so again, deistic, not monotheistic. So we're not getting closer to Yahweh, But again, so what? Why am I going to listen to a cosmologist about theology? In the same way, why am I going to listen to cosmology from theologists? I don't care. You're not qualified to make these comments, and if you are, demonstrate that. So why are we doing this? Proof for God. How do atheists respond? Well, you've heard how I responded, guys. How do atheists respond to this? Proof for God. Okay, there's no proof for God. Cosmologist Ed Harrison came to a conclusion that isn't supported by any evidence. That's not proof for God. The end. Some atheists admit there's some kind of designer out there, okay? And I like, they always use admit. They're making it seem like atheists are very dishonest, which they've said. They said if atheists disagree with all the arguments they're going to present in this book, they're not disagreeing based on logic and reason, but they're disagreeing because they don't want to be held accountable to a God in heaven, the God of the Bible. That's what they believe. So they're throwing in this phrasing to make it seem like atheists are sneaky and snaky and that they're just fools. Okay, so they have to admit that there's some kind of designer. And I've mentioned it in previous chapters as well. Maybe there was. It doesn't mean that it's, eternal, immaterial, etc., etc. Astronomer Fred Hoyle had his atheism shaken. What do you mean shaken? Why not? I mean, challenge would even be a less loaded term. Question his atheist position, okay, but shaken by the anthropic principle and the complexity he saw in life, which we'll cover in the next 2 chapters. Hoyle concluded, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. Now, this, I forget if it was Sagan or if it was somebody else, but there was a phrase like this where it was actually pulled way out of context because it was something like, some people will consider, quote, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests blah, 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 end quote, and then in the actual context, the author continues on to explain why that's not the case. I think it might have been with something Einstein or Sagan that they quoted. Somebody in the comment section pointed out that they were talking about what theists argue, and then Frank and Norman dishonestly pulled it out and said, look, this atheist is making the theist argument. I mean, if you're writing and your reasoning and your arguments amount to just trickery, just flagrant lying, just dishonesty, then maybe you need to reevaluate the point you're trying to make. That's just how I see it. While Hoyle was vague about just who this super intellect is, he recognized that the fine-tuning of the universe requires intelligence. Okay, so what? Other atheists admit design, but then claim there's no designer. What? How do they admit design, but then say there's no designer? That doesn't make any sense. I've never heard that. Have any of you? They say it all happened by chance. Okay, so then it wouldn't be design if it happened by chance. But how can they seriously suggest chance when there's virtually zero probability that all of the 100+ constants would be there in the absence of intelligence? Well, you just said that there's some probability, right? It's not a lot. And again, how are we calculating probability without comparing it to other universes? I don't know. So how can you seriously suggest that it must be a designer on the grounds that there's no life in the universe that we've ever found except for on Earth, because the entire universe that we know is hostile to life, but claim that the universe was fine-tuned for life to exist and only on Earth? That's the dumbest design I've ever heard of. And that's supposed to be from an all-knowing, all-powerful God? This eternal, timeless, amazing being created a big blank canvas just to put a little freckle on it? That doesn't make any sense. And that's their argument. They're not saying that there might be more life, or that there was life, or that God's going to now populate the rest of the planets, or anything like that. They're saying it was just really created for that freckle. That why would you buy a huge piece of canvas if you're just going to draw like a little guy in the corner and then say, look at how well I designed this setup. It wouldn't be designed, it'd be a funky artistic concept. Maybe you're trying to make some kind of statement with it about waste or something. But to say that this is a well-designed canvas that supports this minute drawing on it, nobody would say that that was a good idea. Like, imagine somebody crafting this huge, gigantic canvas. Let's say that it's something ridiculous, like it's the size of New York City, okay? Just so they could put a dot from a pencil on it. And they said, you guys, I designed this so well. Look how well this huge piece of custom canvas supports that dot. Everybody would ask, why aren't you just using a really tiny square of paper to support this dot? It could be supported on a tiny square of paper. Why are you making a gigantic canvas out of it? That's what they're saying. That's their argument. That's their argument? Bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. Atheists have to resort to wild speculation to give chance more of a chance. No, atheists just say, we don't know, and this argument sounds ridiculous for all the reasons I just mentioned. Their speculation is called the multiple universe theory. That, not at all. What? We didn't even talk about this. We don't need to talk about this concept of a multiple universe theory in order to say your argument doesn't make any sense. I don't have to provide an alternative. And that's what some theists don't understand. I don't need to provide an alternative to point out that your suggestion doesn't make much sense. I don't have to say it doesn't make sense, so let me tell you mine, which makes more sense. I can just full stop say, let's evaluate your claim. This claim doesn't make any sense. I don't need to make your claim to replace it. So this idea that, oh, atheists have to resort to this bizarre concept. No, they don't. I didn't. This whole time, I did not talk about this for this chapter. According to the multiple universe theory, there are actually an infinite number of universes in existence, and we just happen to be lucky enough to be in the universe with the right conditions. Well, okay. Why not? You see how they're saying, oh, we just happen to be lucky enough. I know, that and then it sounds stupid, right? It sounds stupid to a theist. It sounds stupid that, gosh, there's a bunch of universes and this one just happens to be right for life. Ha 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 ha. What's really true is that a God who knows everything wasted a bunch of space so that way Earth is right for life. Ha ha ha, atheist. Are they really saying that this is more ridiculous sounding? That's what they think. It's more ridiculous. Given an infinite number of universes, these atheists say, every set of conditions will occur, including the life-supporting conditions of our universe. Okay. First, there are multiple problems with this multiple universe explanation. But again, we don't even need it. You haven't demonstrated your argument. You've put out numbers, but you haven't demonstrated that it makes sense that an all-knowing, all-powerful God created a gigantic canvas to put a single dot on it. That doesn't make any sense. Like, we don't even need to get into, okay, well, you haven't even demonstrated that a designer exists. We don't even need to get into that. Just the claim itself is nonsensical. It's bizarre. First and most significantly, there's no evidence for it. Yeah, just like there's no evidence for a God, specifically a Yahweh. The evidence shows that all of finite reality came into existence with the Big Bang. Finite reality is exactly what we call the universe. If other finite realities exist, then they're beyond our ability to detect. Right. If a God exists outside of the universe, then it's also beyond our ability to detect it. The end. So you've just, fantastic. You have just demonstrated why you cannot prove God with science. Fantastic. You've also demonstrated why we cannot make any belief in this idea of a God based on any type of logic, reason, or evidence. So, great. If other finite realities existed, they're beyond our ability to detect. No one's ever observed any evidence that such universes may exist. Great, same with God. This is why the multiple universe idea is nothing more than a metaphysical concoction, like God. A fairy tale built on blind faith, like God. A detached reality is Stephen Hawking's imaginary time. Yeah, like a timeless God. I mean, All of these arguments, again, I didn't even make this argument as an atheist. They're not arguing, so hopefully they will get to my argument. Hopefully. Because they said some atheists just accept that there's a designer. Some atheists think it's a design, but there's no designer. And some atheists, some kind of silly fairy tale magic, ha ha ha. What about the atheist that says your thing doesn't make sense, the end? Second, as we discussed in the last chapter, an infinite number of finite things, whether we're talking about days, books, bangs, or universes, is an actual impossibility. There can't be an unlimited number of limited universes. I don't know. I don't know if they made a really good argument for that. And again, we don't even need to go down that route. Third, even if other universes could exist, they would need fine-tuning to get started, just as our universe did. Recall the extreme precision of the Big Bang we described in the last chapter. So positing multiple universes doesn't eliminate the need for a designer, it multiplies the need for a designer. No, it doesn't. And if you're going to say that these other fine-tuning can exist, then you're accepting... Wait, aren't you just accepting that this isn't the only option for a universe? We happen to exist, and that's about it? We could have existed in another way, in another type of universe with different rules of physics. The end. You just disproved, like you just got rid of your own argument. Because their argument is like, no, it just multiplies the need for a designer. Okay, so you're saying it could be the case that other conditions could have been habitable, just not life as we know it? Fourth, the multiple universe theory is so broad that any event can be explained away by it. For example, if we ask why did the planes hit the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, we need not blame Muslim terrorists. I love how they throw that in there. The theory lets us say that we just happen to be in the universe where those planes, though they appear to be flown deliberately into buildings, actually hit the buildings by accident. Now, I like this because they could have used any other example, right? But they had to get in there, those dirty Muslim terrorists. They could have used, I don't know, a painting by Picasso. But they didn't. A movie made by Steven Spielberg, right? They could have done that, but no, we have to talk about those filthy Muslims. With the multiple universe theory, we can even let Hitler off the hook. What? What? Where did they come up with this? Where? Perhaps we just happen to be in the universe where the Holocaust appeared to be murder. But actually the Jews secretly conspired with the Germans and sent themselves to the ovens? What? I'm going to read that again, because I feel like I just had a stroke. Perhaps we had just happened to be in the universe, because it's emphasized, the universe, where the Holocaust appeared to be a murder, but actually the Jews secretly conspired with the Germans and sent themselves to the ovens. I want to throw up. What the hell is wrong with these guys? These are the examples they give? This doesn't make... And again, it's bizarre. It's outlandish. It's supposed to make you feel disgusted. It's supposed to. That's why they're choosing it. Because they want to override reason with emotional response. They didn't have to use these examples. They could have used any other example. So then why are you using the most emotional and angering ones that you can? Because you want people to be emotional and angry. You want people to say, I don't want the idea of this being just chance. I guess there has to be a God. So what, it's better that we live in a universe that was finely tuned for life and God just sat by and watched people be wholesale genocided? That's better? That your version, Frank and Norman, your version is better? That we have an all-loving God who let his chosen people die like that? That's better. That's the better, more moral universe. What? Because that's what they're saying. If you don't like how this sounds, you got to go with our version, because that's the more moral, more reasonable one. So it's more moral and reasonable that God would fine-tune a huge blank canvas for a tiny pencil dot, and because he loves us, and then he watches us die. That's the right moral, reasonable concept. That's so bizarre. Oh. Again, I had a really busted week. I don't even know if it's better because I'm so frustrated about something that's so meaningless. And then that's okay, right? Because otherwise I would be just frustrated about things that happened this week. Is this better? Or is it more frustrating? I don't know. Theory, the multi-universe, in fact, the multi-universe theory is so broad it can be used to excuse the atheists who made it up. Perhaps we just happen to be in the universe where people are rational enough to suggest that the nonsense is the truth. What? They're trying to use that gotcha technique, but they're just... I don't even think they understand the multiple universe theory well enough to even turn it into a joke. In the end, the multiple universe theory is simply a desperate attempt to avoid the implication of design. Again, you still have to demonstrate it was designed, and that it even makes sense for a designer to design it this poorly. It doesn't multiply chances, it multiplies absurdities. It's akin to Apollo 13 astronauts denying the fact that NASA designed and built. No, it doesn't. It's not like this at all. In favor of the unsupported theory, there's actually an infinite number of naturally occurring spacecraft out there, and the astronauts are just lucky to be on the one that happens to support life, except it didn't support life, right? It failed. Such a theory is, of course, nonsense, and its obvious absurdity reveals how strong the evidence for design really is. No, it doesn't. You can say that one is ridiculous. It doesn't mean the other one is puffed up. Your argument has to stand on its own. And that's what they're doing here. They're trying to say, look how stupid this is. Therefore, obviously, ours is the better choice. It's not. It's just not. It doesn't stand alone. It doesn't, regardless of how many other alternatives that people can think of and pose as a hypothesis, this has to stand on its own, and it just doesn't. Extreme evidence calls for extreme theories to explain it away. Yeah, so let's go ahead with, what extreme evidence do we have for God? God, quote, look at the heavens. How much longer is this? Man, just a little bit. On February 1st, 2003, President George W. Bush solemnly peered into a TV camera to address the American people. My fellow Americans, this day has brought terrible news and great sadness to our country. At 9 o'clock a.m. this morning, Mission Control in Houston lost contact with our space shuttle Columbia. A short time later, debris was seen falling from the sky from above Texas. The Columbia is lost, and there are no survivors. But God designed it perfectly, guys. It's perfect for life. Traveling at 12,500 miles per hour. Okay, so we're back to miles. Columbia disintegrated as it attempted to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. The second great shuttle tragedy left the nation shaken but not deterred. The cause in which they died will continue, the president vowed. Mankind is led into the darkness beyond our world by the inspiration of discovery and the longing to understand. Our journey into space will go on. Yet, any human journey into space will penetrate only a tiny fraction of it. There are 100 billion stars in our galaxy, and the average distance between those stars is 30 trillion miles. Again, miles. By the way, this distance is another anthropic constant. If the stars were closer or farther apart, planetary orbits would be affected. Affected. Not exploded or impossible, but affected. Okay, so aren't you still demonstrating that the universe is a huge waste of space just for our benefit, and then we still die on our own planet? Like, we can't even exist in most of the planet, right? Most of the planet is ocean. Are we going to live in the ocean, the bottom of the ocean, the middle, in the middle part of the ocean? How are we doing this? How far is 30 trillion miles? It doesn't matter. Stop doing this with, oh, look, there's big numbers, God. Let's put it this way. When the space shuttle is in orbit, it travels about 17,000 miles an hour, almost 5 miles per second, all italics. If you could get into the space shuttle and speed through space at nearly 5 miles per second, it would take you 201,450 years to travel 30 trillion miles. In other words, if you would have gotten into the space shuttle at the time of Christ and begun traveling from our sun toward another star at an average distance away, you would only be 1/100th of the way here right now. Incredible. And you know what? That kind of summarizes their argument. It sounds big, it sounds complex, therefore God. Wow, all of these numbers kind of come together, God. But I don't even understand what this is supposed to be about. Okay, so what? The universe is big, so what? Now keep in mind that's just 2 of the 100 billion stars in our galaxy. How many stars are there in the entire universe? They're making my point for me right now. I could have just waited and they would have made the point for me. They're making the point for me that all of this was created for nothing but us. Really? The number of stars, this is all italics. The number of stars in the universe is about equal to the number of sand grains on all the beaches of the earth, end italics. And at 5 miles per second, it'll take you another 200,000 years to go from one grain of sand to another. The heavens are, italics, awesome. Okay? How does this demonstrate that God wasted a bunch of space for Earth? I'm not, what? What are we doing? The Bible tells us to look at the heavens if we want to get an idea of what God is like. Expressing the teleological argument long before Newton and Paley, David wrote in Psalm 19, "The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands." Now keep in mind, especially if you guys want to go check out, and I'll put a link to it, check out my Book of Enoch reading. So I'll put a link to that in the details section below. In the Book of Enoch, it does explain what guys like David believed. So this is the belief at the time for how the planet works, our planet. And it talks about nothing at all like what we would consider to be cosmology. It's like flat Earth, there's a dome, the sun is small, it goes in and out of the dome through like these windows, and the moon then goes in and out of the dome with these windows, and there's tiny little dots in the sky, so we can use them for astrology. That's what it's for. So we can use it for calendars and astrology. That's what the Bible says, not just the Book of Enoch, but the Bible itself. It says that we are using, that God created the stars for time telling and fortune telling. That's what they're for. Wow. So that's the work of his hands. It doesn't say that it's, if it was saying something like each of these stars is so far away, you would never get to them in 100 lifetimes. That would be closer to what we see in reality. But it doesn't. It just says that, wow, look at the sky. Cool. It's a look at the trees argument. A couple of centuries later, the prophet Isaiah posed a question from God. "To whom will you compare me? Or who is my equal, says the Holy One?" The answer is in the next verse. "Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens." Isaiah goes on to say that God knows all of the heaven's stars by name. Yeah, but at that time, they also believed there's only just a handful of those stars. They didn't know that we even were in a galaxy. They didn't know there were other galaxies. So it seems a lot less impressive. That's not all the grains of sand on Earth. That's all the grains of sand in a shot glass. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's still a lot, but it's a lot less impressive than all the grains of sand on the planet. Why does God tell us to compare him with the heavens? Because God has no limits. That is not the old belief. How are these guys this bad at their own theology? They just make up theology at this point. And from our perspective, neither do the heavens. God is the unlimited limiter, the uncreated creator of all things. Again, where is this demonstrated? We've made a weird argument and just stapled God onto it. We wrote 8.5 pages about Apollo 13. The majority of the argument is just the retelling of what happened for Apollo 13. That's it. That's the majority of this chapter. And then we're just stapling God there and saying he's this and he's that and he's this and he's that. Now notice they actually mentioned this a bit earlier. Extreme evidence calls for extreme theories to explain it away. These guys are really giving away how they think, aren't they? It's almost like every argument against atheism, it's really an argument that they can use on their own selves. Look at this. We need a uncreated this and a magical this, and that's okay. That's not stupid fairy tale faith. But more universes? No, that's just dumb. He's self-existing, an infinite being who created this vast and beautiful universe out of nothing and who holds it all together today. There's only one entity in our experience that can provide an analogy of the infinite God. An image intended to depict God won't do. It merely limits his majesty. Only the heavens scream out infinity. They already said it's finite, so I don't know why they're talking about infinity. Infinity is what describes each of God's attributes, including his power, knowledge, justice, and love. No, infinity is how you have attributed qualities to God. You didn't demonstrate anything. You've just said there is a God, because to me it makes sense, because I'm only thinking about myself living in this one spot on earth. Therefore, God is infinite. That doesn't make any sense at all. It's nonsense. This is why the Bible uses the heavens to help us grasp the infinite height of God's love. No, because it wasn't infinite height. In fact, according to the book of Enoch, it's the depths under the earth were held up by columns as if of fire, and it just keeps going down. That would be much more infinite, because if you look at the sky, the heavens, it's blocked off with a dome. That's it. So this doesn't even, like, even again, if you read the Bible fairly, this still doesn't get us any closer to what the authors are even saying. Psalm 103:11 says, "For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who revere him." How high are the heavens above the earth? When you consider there's 30 trillion miles between stars, as numerous as the grains of beach sand, you might as well say the heavens are infinitely high. But that's not what they believe. That's not the Jewish traditional belief for the planet. That's just not it. There's a limit, a very finite limit. Ugh. Indeed, that's the height of God's love. Again, you're just using the Bible. So what? God's infinite love is perhaps what led President Bush to quote Isaiah in his tribute to Columbia's crew. Where's God's infinite love in Columbia's crew? They just died. And all of their families were now suffering. God's infinite love, though, guys. In the skies today we saw destruction and tragedy. Yet farther than we can see, there is comfort and hope. In the words of the prophet of Isaiah, "Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all of these? He who brings out the starry hosts, one by one, and calls them each by name. Because of his great power and his mighty strength, not one of them is missing. The same creator who names the stars and knows the names of the 7 souls we mourn today. The crew of the shuttle Columbia did not return safely to her Earth, but we can pray they are safely home." And this is it. There it is. It's, again, another emotional appeal. It feels better. And honestly, it does feel better. If I could see my sister again, that's amazing. And you can see I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. But that is not enough of a reason to therefore just accept these wild claims. And then whose wild claim? Which branch of Christianity? Should I be Muslim? Are we reincarnated and I'd have a better chance if I improve my karma by following this concept of dharma in Hinduism? How am I going to see her again? I can't just, even if I just decide to believe it, it doesn't get me any closer to figuring out how I can see her again. What if I follow this type of Christian and I'm just wrong? And then I don't get to see her because the Muslim version of heaven is correct and she's in Jannah, and then I just am suffering. That doesn't make any sense. So even if we agree, okay, let's be emotional about it, it still doesn't get us any closer to their conclusion. So let's read their conclusion. Nearly 2,000 years ago, Paul wrote near the beginning of his letter to the Romans, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what is made, so that men are without excuse." Okay, look at the trees. There's that argument. "The evidence for a designer certainly is clear in creation, but we often take it for granted." Great. So a guy 2,000 years ago who didn't understand science, natural processes, etc., believed that we could just say God did it. Just like some guys 2,000 years later are saying, I don't understand how this could work, therefore God did it. Great. Good job. You guys are equal to Paul. You're not any closer to explaining anything, but you're using the same argument. Congratulations. C.S. Lewis, in his classical book, The Screwtape Letters, provides us great insight into this tendency that we have that we take for granted the amazing world all around us. The senior demon, Screwtape, writes some advice to his junior demon, Wormwood, on how to keep people from becoming Christians. Screwtape writes, "Keep pressing home on the ordinariness of things. Above all, do not attempt to use science, the real sciences, as a defense against Christianity. They will positively encourage him to think about the realities he cannot touch and see. There have been sad cases among modern physicists. The, quote, sad cases are, of course, physicists who have been honest with the evidence they've seen and have become Christians." So C.S. Lewis, now he's an authority? Really? That's your evidence? That's your supporting evidence? a fantastical book. We can even say it's an allegory, but that's it? Some author who's Christian? Wow. Wow. Lewis has hit on a tendency many of us have. In our fast-paced lives, we rarely stop and observe the world around us, and therefore tend to consider every amazing facet of this beautiful universe as ordinary. I don't know, maybe you do, but I'm pretty impressed by the world around us. But as we've seen, it's anything but ordinary. Now science is showing us, like at no other time in history, that this universe is of incredible design and complexity. It gives us a new perspective on the world that we too often take for granted. Astronauts get a new perspective from their spaceships that help them realize the universe is anything but ordinary. So again, so what? So some people are disenchanted and bored, and some people aren't. Your desire, or sorry, the how true this argument is doesn't depend on my personal feeling about the world around me today. That's such a bizarre thing they're even going into this. When the first astronauts passed around over the surface of the moon and saw the Earth rise, something no human being had ever seen before, they reverently read from the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Did they read from the book of Genesis? They brought a freaking Bible with them? I didn't know that. Okay. What else would fit the moment? A recitation of the multiple universe theories certainly wouldn't have expressed the awe the astronauts were experiencing. Ha ha ha, get it, guys? It's not emotional enough. So, checkmate atheists. I mean, they're really saying this, right? They're really saying this, that it's not emotionally manipulative enough, that it's not encompassing enough to describe amazing emotions. Therefore, ha ha ha, that's dumb. Wow. This is the worst chapter we've read thus far. I don't know if it gets any worse beyond this, but this is the worst argument. This is the worst. Oh my goodness. And this is the conclusion. It's just this meandering nonsense. They witnessed design from an angle no one had ever seen before and were overwhelmed with the realization that the amazing creation requires a creator. Really? That's what they did? Really? John Glenn echoed their convictions when, at 77 years old, he looked out to the Space Shuttle Discovery and remarked, "To look out at this kind of creation and not believe in God, to me, is impossible." Okay, so what? Is John Glenn a theologian that's going to explain to me exactly how this all makes sense within a certain theology? The raw impact of their experiences reveals the intuitive nature. Yeah, there's a lot of intuitive stuff that's just factually wrong. Of the teleological argument, you don't need anyone to tell you that something beautifully designed requires a designer. It's practically self-evident. Well, yeah, if you smuggle in the word design, then it already automatically implies a designer. Yeah, it's self-evident. Just like if I say an accident, it implies no designer. So word choice matters. And that's all this is so far, a bunch of word games. That is not convincing. Nevertheless, let's state the argument formally again, with an emphasis on what we've discovered in this chapter. Number one, every design had a designer. Number two, as verified by the anthropic principle, we know, italics, beyond a reasonable doubt, end italics, that the universe is designed. Therefore, number three, the universe had a designer. No, not at all. There's no plausible explanation for the anthropic principle other than a cosmic designer. I've already explained how. Atheists must take extreme measures to deny the obvious. No, I just pointed out how extremely obvious how extremely obviously silly this argument is of the canvas and the dot. When they dream up hypothetical theories, didn't even need to do that are not supported by any evidence, right? And in fact are actually impossible. Okay, so not Christianity, right? They have left the realm of reason and rationality and entered in the realm of blind faith. So faith is bad, apparently. See, this is the thing they're trying to say. They're insulting faith, aren't they? They really are. Physicist Paul Davies writes, "One may find it easier to believe in an infinite array of universes than an infinite deity, but such a belief must rest on faith rather than observation." Okay, great. So I'll be very happy to read what physicist Paul Davies has to say that he observed an infinite deity. Because that's the argument, right? That's the argument they're trying to make. Believing without observation is exactly what atheists accuse religious people of doing. But ironically, it's what the atheists are pushing, a religion of blind faith. Christians have good reasons based on observation, such as the Big Bang and anthropic principle, for believing what they believe. No, they don't. Atheists don't. That's why we don't have enough faith to be atheists. This is just biased. Like I said, these same arguments against atheism can be used against Christianity. We don't need to have an alternative multi-universe theory. We can just, exactly what I did, point out how bizarre it is to make a suggestion that this entire universe is a blank canvas except for one dot, and that it was designed on purpose that way. And also in this one dot, most of it kills us. We are alive despite how the universe is set up. Whether it was set up by accident or not, we are alive despite that, not because of it. This blind faith of the atheist reveals the rejection of a designer is not a head there it is. So again, they're just claiming it's that they just don't want to believe, guys. It's not as if we lack evidence or intellectual justification for a designer. So this is just Christians telling other Christians we're really smart, and whether it's faith or science, we've got both on our side. And these atheists are just losers that don't want to deal with reality. On the contrary, the evidence is impressive. No, it's not. What we have is a will problem. Some people, despite the evidence, simply don't want to admit that there's a designer. Again, it's just a bunch of wordplay and emotional tactics. In fact, one critic of the anthropic principle admitted, use a thesaurus, guys, to the New York Times, that his real objection was totally emotional because it smells of religion and intelligent design. So much for scientific objectivity. Great. And when one of my AP psychology students used the New York Times instead of a research article, they lost a significant number of points because I told them they needed a research article. And they said, but teacher, we used a reference. And I said, the opinion section of the New York Times doesn't mean anything in a scientific writing. That's it. So now here we have exactly what my students lost points for. And they're trying to use it to prove one of the biggest arguments, trying to demonstrate one of the biggest, or the answer to the biggest questions in life that's still left unanswered. And I didn't even accept it in one of my classes because it's not good evidence. So there we go. There it is. It is a head problem. That's it. They have not provided enough evidence to the point that this same type of argument with the same type of quote unquote support, I did not give my students a good grade for that because it just wasn't good enough evidence. It wasn't scientifically supported. It wasn't research based. It was, well, I don't want to do all the reading. That's a lot of work. Let me find something easier and slap it together and turn it in. And the teacher will be just impressed anyway and will just give us an A+. This is it. This is the same exact tactic. Except the thing is, my students learned. And they're teenagers. These are adults that apparently have a PhD in theology. They're used to writing papers. But I guess theology courses don't require, evidence, research, scientific writing, scientific reading, and of course in-text citations. So I guess they could get away with this kind of writing, but my students certainly can't. And I certainly can't with my degree pursuit in psychology. So I certainly couldn't get away with this either. So this is a head problem. It's that these guys don't understand what constitutes scientific evidence or conclusions that we can draw. And because they don't understand this, they think they do, they've decided we've actually met all of these burdens of proof, and these atheists just don't want to admit it. That's it. These guys are, I don't want to sound arrogant about this. I really don't. But it seems like they just are not equipped for this discussion. This is a book they shouldn't have read or written. And it's a book I shouldn't have written. But this is a book they should not have written. They're really out of their element here. They really are. Like I said, if I'm buying it from theologians, I want to read about theology. If I wanted to learn about the second law of thermodynamics, I'd go ask somebody that's like a physicist. They're really out of their element here. They really are. So for them, so much for scientific understanding. In Chapter 6, we'll address more of these motivations for denying the strong evidence for the existence of God. But first, in Chapter 5, we'll explore more persuasive evidence for a designer, the evidence found in life itself. Oh boy. Well, guys, I sure hope that was fun for you because it was super frustrating for me. This is a really poorly written book, honestly. This is just really, really, really bad writing. And again, I would not accept this for any kind of essay submission as a teacher for high school students. So I'm genuinely amazed that this is something that two adults wrote after going through so many courses in university. I'm just really amazed that they don't know how to write a scientific paper, or that they don't understand how to support their arguments in a way that is demonstrable as opposed to just making a bunch of claims. You know, like I said, the in-text citations thing. There's a few of them thrown in there, but it's mostly about quotations from the people that are saying things that they want to hear. It's not from the stuff that any of us really care about. It's just, oh yeah, this is from this one book that this guy said this thing and we like what he said. So what? And of course, the emotional manipulation, you know, because why not? And I guess that's the summary. It's really unfortunate. And again, most of it was about Apollo 13, which doesn't get us any closer to their argument making sense. So, like I said, I would not accept this from my students. I'm really amazed that they managed to get through this much higher education, and either they're not going to be using something that they did learn about scientific writing, or that they just never learned about scientific writing, they forgot how to use scientific writing, or that this isn't scientifically supported. With that being said, if you guys want to make sure not to miss another video, go ahead and click the subscribe and the bell notification thingamajig. And there's also other ways to catch up with me, like the Discord channel that we have, Twitter, I guess X, and Instagram as well. And all those links are in the details section below. Please feel free to post your comments, as many comments as you like. It's fine if you comment and then keep watching and then just pause it and comment and so on. Instead of editing your post, that's totally fine. But with that being said, guys, as always, thanks for listening.